Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Today we have a special episode for you, Erev Tisha B'Av, and we couldn't have a more appropriate guest. So welcome, stay seated. We're going to have some very interesting information for you and also inspiring and motivating. I'm Lesley Kaplan. Welcome to the Monday Motivation Spotlight, which has now been going for 40 weeks. Yes, this is episode 40. So instead of being excited that it's actually 40 weeks, I'm on the one hand obviously excited, but on the other hand saddened because this episode was started, or this podcast was started 2 weeks after the war, which means that we've now been going and been at war for 42 weeks and still going and not seeing any signs of anything ending right now. And once again, another sadly tragic week for Am Yisrael. So this Tisha B'Av is going to be taking on a very different Tisha B'Av and very different meaning than what many others have been, with everything that Am Yisrael has gone through in the past year, or past, as we say, 42 weeks. So before I introduce our guest, I would also like to thank our co-hosts, ACI, and I would also like to remind you how we work. This podcast is not a networking group, but what we do is you have the opportunity to chat via the chat, ask questions via the chat, to our speaker I'm going to introduce now, and you also have the opportunity to share your details, your business details, because even though it's not a networking group, our idea for this whole podcast was, number one, to inspire and motivate us, and on the other hand, to give exposure to Israeli businesses, individuals, and organizations. So here we go. You can see on our screen our guest for the day. Good morning to Les Saidel. I'm going to remove my spotlight and spotlight just him. Who is Les Saidel? So firstly, Les Saidel, I've actually known Les and his family for many, many years. Les's in-laws and my friend Cheryl, who I think is here, I can't see yet exactly all the participants, who is Les's wife. Her parents knew me from day Efes, from the moment I was born. So we go back many, many years. Ilana, who I see is here as well, also knows Cheryl's parents for many, many years. So welcome. So who is Les? Les and Cheryl, and Les, our focus on him right now, is a Master Artisan baker by profession. He's director of the Saidel Jewish Baking Center and the Showbread Institute, which in Hebrew is Machon Lechem HaPanim. And he specializes in researching and baking Jewish heritage breads. They also have a delicious lineup of baked goods. And as well as being in the baking industry, he's a writer, he's the author, he's an author, and he is a Beit HaMikdash researcher. So we've got lots of interesting stuff for you to share with us, Les. Share with us about your Aliyah story. We were just talking, you've been here almost 40 years. The business has been going for around 16 years. Share with us your story related to Tisha B'Av. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for hosting me on this wonderful show. It's very rare that I speak on a show where the name of the host is also my own name, Lesley Saidel. So
correct. And my friends call me Les, but I'm known as Lesley.
Les Saidel, okay. So today I want to share with you a story which is basically the quest to find my own voice. That's how I would title the subject of the discussion. And just to give you a quick background, I was born in South Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa in 1965. I grew up in the middle-class neighborhood of Yeovil in Johannesburg, a very vibrant Jewish community with many Batei Knesset. I went to a Jewish school in Johannesburg called Yeshiva College, where a lot of my friends made Aliyah from as well. I think, Lesley, were you in Yeshiva College?
No, I wasn't, but I know many people that were there.
Okay. So my story begins when I was in the second grade. The story my parents and my friends tell me is that I was a very naughty kid. They said I used to get up to a lot of mischief as a very small kid. When I was in the second grade, they came to the conclusion that this was not normal, so they sent me for all kinds of tests with psychologists and cognitive therapists, etc. And they came to the conclusion that the reason I was very naughty in school is because I was bored. and they said I was brought in the class, and they decided to push me up to a higher class. I skipped one class. I went straight from the second grade to the fourth grade. As a result of that, I finished school at the young age of 16, which is very young. And although maybe educationally it was a correct move on my parents' part, it was socially a very difficult experience because I was always the baby in the class. It was very difficult to fit in socially with the rest of the people in the class. I grew up a little bit of a loner. That's the way I grew up. When I was 13 years old, the reason I'm telling you this is because it all ties in with the bakery and the answer. It's all going to come together. When I was 13 years old in school, I had a Gemara teacher. His name was Rabbi Varshavsky. He was a British London rabbi. He used to teach in Yeshiva College, and he used to teach us Gemara for every day. And I must admit that I wasn't the best Gemara student. I often used to bunk his classes. I used to skip his classes and go jogging sometimes. I was a bit of a fitness freak at the time. And the interesting thing about Rabbi Varshavsky is that he used to come to school every day with his own homemade sandwich made at home. And the bread that the sandwich was made from looked completely different to any bread I'd ever encountered before in my life. It was dark bread, and until then I'd never seen dark bread before. All the bread they used to sell in the early 1970s was white bread in South Africa. Nobody knew about healthy baking before at least the 1990s. And I questioned him about this bread one day, and he said that he actually, not only did he bake the bread himself, but he also grinds the flour himself. He takes wheat grains and he has this manual wheat grinder which he uses to grind the grains and make his own whole wheat flour. And I asked him to taste a little piece of the bread just so that I could understand what kind of bread it was. And he gave me a piece to taste. And from that moment on, I got hooked on healthy bread and healthy baking. That was the start of my baking career at a ripe old age of bar mitzvah. One day, instead of bringing his Gemara to the school, he brought his baking utensils, and he taught the whole class how to bake this bread that he made himself at home. So baking became a kind of a hobby with me, a kind of a passion more than a hobby. I was very, very interested in health and nutrition at the time. And I started baking my own bread for my bar mitzvah present. I asked my parents to buy me a manual grain grinder that I could also emulate my mentor's method of baking his own bread. And I started grinding my own flour and making my own bread. And the strangest thing is that nobody really seemed to like the bread that I was baking except me. It was very, very heavy bread, very heavy bread. I was once on vacation with my family in the coastal town in South Africa called Port Elizabeth, and they were having lunch with us. And by mistake, the loaf of bread that I had baked on holiday fell on the floor, and the floorboards were made out of wood. It was a wooden floor, and it made a huge thud on the floor. It was a heavy, heavy loaf of bread. And my uncle said, "What's going on? Is there an earthquake? What's going on here?" So to say that I was a successful baker at a young age is not exactly an accurate statement, but I was really passionate about it. It was a very intense hobby with me. And basically from age 13, I've been baking throughout my life. When I finished school, I knew exactly what I wanted to be. It wasn't a baker. What I wanted to be was an optometrist. And the reason I wanted to be an optometrist is because I've been wearing glasses since age 6. So from age 6, the authority figure for me was the optometrist in his elegant white coat. That was like the epitome of what I wanted to be. So I decided that when I finished school, I was going to study optometry. And I actually started studying optometry until I got to the 3rd year. And in the 3rd year, something monumental happened. What happened in the 3rd year when I was studying optometry is that IBM published their first personal computer. They put out their first IBM PC. I don't know if anybody remembers the old IBM PC, the old clunky box with a screen in green and black. And obviously this was revolutionary at the time. Today it's an antique museum piece. But at the time, it was quite revolutionary. And when I first encountered the IBM PC, suddenly I lost interest in optometry. And I started getting more interested in computers and programming. And I made a decision, and I went to my parents and I said, Mom and Dad, I want to stop studying optometry and I want to switch to working in computers. I liked computers more than optometry. So my parents were absolutely crestfallen. They were devastated because they'd invested a lot of money in my optometry studies. And they insisted that if I do want to pursue a career in computers, that I first finish the first degree that I was studying in optometry, which is a combination of physics and optics, so that I first finished it, that I'd at least have a first degree when I finished the course in optometry, which I did. I completed my first degree in physics, and then I decided to pursue a career in high tech, in computers. And at the same time, I also decided to make Aliyah. I was 21 years at the time, 21 years of age. I made Aliyah in 1985. I've been in Israel almost 39 and a half years, almost going on 40 years. And it was a bit of a brave thing to do because my parents had already foreseen a career for me back in South Africa with a comfortable optometry practice amongst the family, remaining in South Africa. And this was also a little bit of a shock to them that I wanted to move to Israel. So as I said, when I was growing up in school, I was a bit of a loner. So this sort of permeated everything throughout my life. I've been a loner throughout my life and done non-conventional things. So I made Aliyah in 1985, and actually I was the chalutz, I was the pioneer, because a year later, the rest of my family decided to join me, and they came a year later in 1986. I started working in computers. Actually, before I started working, I went to do a course in Beersheba to learn a little bit more about the theory of computers. And at that time, computers was not like it is today. In order to work in computers today, you need at least a first degree or a master's degree in computers. Back then, it was in its fledgling state. Anybody who knew anything minute about computers, they were looking for people who knew anything. The way to get a job in computers was to go to the computer bookstore and buy a book about what you wanted to work in and just quickly read up about it. And then 10 minutes later, you could go for an interview and they would hire you. And that's exactly the way it worked with me. I went to buy a book. At that time, the operating system was MS-DOS 2.0 or something like that, long, long before Windows. I went to buy a book about assembly language programming, and I applied for a job for an assembly language programmer, which I only learned for about 2 weeks. And I got the job because they couldn't find many assembly language programmers. And we started working in this company. They eventually decided to relocate to America in the early 1990s. And I went with them to America to help them establish the firm. And they wanted me to remain with them in America to continue working. But that was the time that I got called up to the army. So I decided to come back to Israel, even though I was 26 years old. And I could have stayed on in the States working in computers. I decided to come back and go into the army when I was called up. And I actually spent 6 years in the army, partially in Keva, working as a computer programmer. So for basically, since my Aliyah for 25 years, I was working in computers. That was my profession till I got to my mid-40s. And then two things happened simultaneously. First of all, I had a kind of a midlife crisis. That was the first thing. The second thing is that at that time, there was the dot-com crash. All the companies who had startups with dot-com websites, they all went bang because it was a big bubble that eventually burst. And I came to the realization that at age 44, I was not a great commodity in the computer world. Computer world is a great market for young people. They're looking for the youngsters straight out of school who have very few family commitments, and they weren't looking for an old has-been 44-year-old programmer. So for many months, I tried to find work. It was a bit of a depression in the field, and I couldn't find work. And discussing it with my wife, Cheryl, we decided to make a complete change in direction and open up a bakery, the complete diametric opposite of computer programming and high tech. we decided to convert the back of our home into a boutique artisan bakery. We built our own brick oven. It's a huge brick oven, the second biggest brick oven in Israel. There's one in Yafo, in Abu Lafia Bakery. I think that is the biggest one. Ours is the second biggest brick oven in Israel. We built a bakery in the back of our home, and we started baking breads that Israel had never encountered before, because at that time, in the early 2000s, nobody had already hooked onto the health fad yet. It was still in its fledgling state, and nobody knew what organic bread was or healthy bread, why whole grain bread is better than non-whole grain bread. And it was a little bit difficult to break into a market which there was very little demand for, because you had to create the demand because people didn't really know what you were selling. So it was a bit of a tough struggle in the beginning. And the biggest struggle, I would say, was the change in lifestyle from being on a high-tech salary, which even today is, I think, is still very much a higher salary bracket, than being on a baker salary, which is a drastic reduction in income. And it meant a complete lifestyle change, not only for myself, but for the rest of the family. And that was a very, very intense and very difficult life change for everybody in the family. It wasn't completely painless, I must admit. It had its little drawbacks. It wasn't flawless. But Baruch Hashem, after a while, everybody got used to the new reality, and the family all pitched in. It became a complete family bakery that everybody does their little part. We divided the baking skills between Cheryl and myself. She does some of the baking, I do some of the baking. The kids help out with the bagging of the breads, with the answering of the phones. It's a complete family effort. The bakery in Karnei Shomron, it's the basic premise behind the bakery is that it's, first of all, a very healthy bakery that has mostly organic products made from organic ingredients. And it also encourages people to buy as much whole grain ingredients, because that is much healthier than buying white bread and white baked goods. We began selling here locally in Karnei Shomron, but we came to the conclusion that it's not enough clientele to support a business here in Karnei Shomron alone. Although there are already 9,000 people in Karnei Shomron, there were other bakeries who sell regular baking goods like rogalach and white bread and white rolls. So most people who weren't familiar with this new commodity, there was not enough of a market. So we had to expand our horizons a little bit. And we started selling out to the central areas in the country, for example, in Ra'anana, in Beit Shemesh, in Modi'in, in Jerusalem. And obviously we continued selling here locally. And from that point on, when we made that decision to start selling out, the business started taking off a little bit. It began to improve, and the income began to increase. After a few years of baking, we decided that the year of a bakery, if you have never been a baker in a professional capacity, you don't know this, but if you're a professional baker, the cycle of the year is very like a sine wave. There's ups and downs, and there's certain periods in the year where people order a lot of bread, and there's certain periods of the year where they order very, very little bread. Around the Chagim time, there's a big spike in the orders of the baked goods. But in the summer vacation, for example, like July, August, when everybody goes on vacation, a little bit less this year, but normally when there's no war on, people go on vacation and the bread sales plummet. So in order to supplement our income in the months which were lower income, we decided to branch into a new avenue of operations, doing baking classes, giving baking workshops and teaching people how to bake. We did all kinds of general baking workshops like challah baking, bagels, French baking, Italian baking, croissants and burekas, healthy baking, sourdough baking. We continue to give these workshops until this very day.
You also have a Beit HaMikdash workshop, am I right? Something to do with the Beit HaMikdash?
Right. I'm going to get to that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got into giving classes, and I discovered that I enjoyed teaching almost as much as I enjoyed baking, which is quite a revelation. I never ever thought of myself as a teacher before, and what we thought of is that the area of the workshops is a more long-term sustainable proposition than maintaining the bakery into when you get older, the baking becomes more and more physically demanding. It's more difficult to sustain. So we saw the workshops as an option to continue our operation into the future, where we wouldn't be able to sustain the physical effort and labor. So we decided to shift the focus of the business from the bakery to the workshops. And instead of being about 70-30 in the favor of baking, it shifted to the opposite direction of 70-30 of the workshops in favor of the baking. About 10 years ago, I was busy selling challahs in our store here. We have a store here in the back of the bakery to our local customers here in Kanei Shomron. And one of our customers came into the store and he showed me this book about the 5 species of grain. It was written by a professor in Bar Ilan University. His name is Professor Zohar Amar. And he wrote a book about the 5 species of grain. According to the Torah, there are 5 species of grain which you make flour from them, you make bread from them. You have to make the bracha of hamotzi on the bread. Only 5 species: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. Those are the 5 species of grain. And in the back, he did a botanical study to try and identify these species from ancient sources in the Talmud and in the Mishnah. And at the back of the book, there was a chapter all about the lechem hapanim, the showbread from the Beit HaMikdash. And my neighbor asked me, had I seen this book? I said, never seen it before. He said, sure, you want to read it? It looked very interesting. So I started reading the book. And I'd known a little bit about I knew a little bit about the lechem hapanim, the showbread, because I'd read about the different Jewish breads. In fact, Jewish bread became my area of research. I was giving workshops on it. I started writing a book about it, which is about to be published very soon. It's called the Jewish Bread Bible. So I'd done a lot of research into Jewish bread, and the most authentic breads, which you can really call intrinsically Jewish, are those from the Beit HaMikdash, like the lechem hapanim, like the showbread. And when I started reading Professor Amar's book, I came to the realization that I knew absolutely nothing about the lechem hapanim. He was the first person in 2,000 years, since the second Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed, to try reproduce the lechem hapanim, to try bake it as they did 2,000 years ago. Unfortunately, his baking results were not that spectacular. He's a professor and a botanist by profession. He's not a baker. So his baking results were not that great. So I contacted him and I offered to help him in the baking aspect to try and improve the baking results of the lechem hapanim, of the showbread. And since about 10 years ago, we've been collaborating together. Professor Zohar Amar from Bar Ilan University. We've also been collaborating with Machon HaMikdash, basically trying to recreate, to reverse engineer the lechem hapanim, the showbread, to try and make it the way they made it 2,000 years in Mamash in the Beit HaMikdash. And thank God we've reached a stage where we are almost there. We have a very good result that is almost identical to the result that they made about 2,000 years ago, which is quite a breakthrough because it took thousands and thousands of experiments to try get to these results. A lot of time and effort. And we decided that instead of just keeping the subject to ourselves as a pure research endeavor, we would expose it to the public. And we did this in 2 ways. The first way is that I wrote a book about it. It's called Sefer Meir Panim. It's a Sefer Kodesh on the lechem hapanim, which concentrates all the research about the lechem hapanim, or about the showbread. And the second thing we decided was to do workshops specifically about the Beit HaMikdash breads. And this began about 7 years ago in 2017. We began doing these workshops. And as far as I know, there's nobody else in the world who teaches people how to bake breads from the Beit HaMikdash. It's something quite unique. And it's actually quite phenomenal to see the interest out there amongst the public and the yearning for the subject of the Beit HaMikdash. You think that the Beit HaMikdash was some historical thing that is long gone and nobody really thinks of it in a realistic sense anymore. But when you start talking to them about the actual bread and they see it and they smell it and they touch it and they actually bake it themselves, it brings the whole thing to life, and it arouses something in people which is indescribable. It's something that is uniting. It's something that is universal. Even we give workshops not only to Jewish audiences. We've had diverse audiences from strange places like Singapore, from Bolivia, from all different kinds of places, Christian groups, Jewish groups, and they all seem fascinated by the subject of the Beit HaMikdash. It arouses something within them that lights a spark that has long been dormant. So this is a very fascinating topic, and obviously in the weeks before Tisha B'Av, we give a lot of these workshops. We just gave one yesterday talking about the Thanksgiving offering. It's an incredible subject to talk about. It brings it to life. And the most important thing about it is that we are working towards a goal. We're trying to work towards rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash is a vast, vast subject of many, 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 many different things. The menorah, the Lechem Panim, the Mizbeach, the Kior to wash the hands and feet. There's hundreds and hundreds of different topics, and each one of them has enormous ramifications to the way we should lead our lives. They teach us lessons in how we should lead our lives even before we have the Beit HaMikdash rebuilt. And the Lechem Panim has many of these lessons in them to teach us how to lead our lives in a specific way. And one of these lessons is the lesson of joy. The shape of the Lechem Panim was shaped like a smiley mouth. The shape of the bread resembles a smiling mouth. And when anybody ever saw the Lechem Panim in the Beit HaMikdash, which they used to show everybody when they went up to Jerusalem on the Shloshet HaRegalim, on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, they would bring the Lechem Panim out to show everybody, and everybody could see this Lechem Panim shaped in the shape of a smiley mouth, and it would immediately trigger an emotion of joy. And that is one of the lessons. There's many, many lessons of the Lechem Panim, but that is one of the most intrinsic lessons, that we should lead our lives in joy and be happy in our lot and serve Hashem in joy and not in sorrow. And that is the message. Hopefully we come into Tisha B'Av, that even though we're mourning the destruction of the temple, even though we've had an incredibly difficult year with a war going on and so many tragedies, so many people's loss of life, and the Chatufim, it's a terrible tragedy, but it has a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, that there's hope, and there's hope that things are going to improve, and the incredible necessity for joy and to remain optimistic and expect the Geulah to come, hopefully before Tisha B'Av, and then we won't have to have the workshops will go really to the real Beit HaMikdash and do the real thing. Thank you very much.
Amen, amen, amen. Wow, Les, you are definitely original, and I love the way that your childhood passion turned into your career and into basically your lifelong, message, and the way that you were able to combine it with other passions of yours. So, kol hakavod. For those of you that joined live, you see I did write jewishbakingcenter.com, their website, where you can have a look. There's a section on workshops. There's other areas. You're also invited to order their breads if you live in the areas where there's deliveries. If people are in other areas and want to order, how can they order? Do you have any kind of system, or they should just be in contact with you separately?
Right now, we have a central route where we do deliveries every Friday. It depends how far away from the central route. Maybe we can organize something, people going from place to place, we can get it to them.
Right, great. Okay, there's always a way to get it and to taste their delicious breads and desserts. It's not only breads, but you've branched out to many other things. I know you have, I think, a famous apple pie. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's not an original Jewish baked item. It's more like an American baked item, homemade.
Right.
Apple pie. But
everybody
still seems to like it, even though I'm not American. I make a very good American apple pie.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you're right. Who says you have to be American? Wow, Les, thank you so much. You've been a perfect guest for this auspicious day of Erev Tisha B'Av. So I thank all of you who have also been joining us live. And those of you that are going to be watching the recordings, I welcome you as well to join us live sometime, because there is a definite kind of vibe of being actually physically present. So we should wish Am Yisrael, only good days. And now going into Erev Tisha B'Av and almost Tisha B'Av, we should have a tzom. We normally say kal umashma'oti. This year I see people are also adding the tzom shaket umashma'oti. We should have a peaceful and quiet Tisha B'Av. And may we only have good things. Am Yisrael Chai. We are strong. We are very resilient. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. I'll post details. Those of you who registered, I'll post details that you see. I remind you also that I have a YouTube and Spotify channel where this recording is going to be. So if you want to re-listen to this, or if you want to view and listen to our other amazing spotlights, you can catch it there. Thank you again to ACI, our co-host. I'm Lesley Kaplan. Som Mashmoti Kal, and we'll see you next week on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Thank you again, Les. Bye-bye.
Bye.